So we're thrilled to have it. We're thrilled to have Joe here, and we're very pleased that you're here. So I'll turn it over to Joe Havel. Thank you.
And I want to thank Talley and Beth and Meredith. This is like the best, you know, this is like a family situation. They're really great to me, and they let me do, they make it so easy for me. They're such a pleasure to work with, and they let me do whatever the hell I want to in this room, essentially. So I can do, I was teasing Talley about something a show we did a while ago, and I said, I barely put anything in there that you could actually sell. And she said, no, I loved that show. And so I just really appreciate what they do for me. And my version of Talley, the interesting thing about Talley coming in and seeing the work in the studio is she went, there's a show here already. And of course I ended up, that was a number of months ago, and I ended up until last weekend essentially remaking almost every component of it to make it perfect, okay? Because it wasn't a show for me, it was a show for her, and I had to, but in that way, it was kind of fortunate that we recognized it, and then I had that kind of time to sort of bring everything into focus. I'm going to do something which is unusual. I usually do these talks even more spontaneously, but I'll give you a little background, and I'm going to read something. I played in rock and roll bands when I was young, and I played with this one guy who then I went to, starting in 7th grade, and in fact, every band I played in with him, he was a really great musician, but he was a really difficult person. And I played in band after band with him, and all the other people would leave. Do you know what I mean? And we played in band after band after band, all the way through high school into college. And then he also went to school with me at the University of Minnesota in undergraduate school, in art school. And after that, we sort of parted ways, and we didn't have any communication with each other. I lost track of him for a long period of times, and as I like to say, you know, he got married and had a couple of kids, and then 3 wives later, for him, not me, he looked me up and started to communicate with me. And I had a show at a museum in Gateshead in England, and he showed up at the opening. And I knew he was going to show up, though I wasn't quite sure. And we reconnected, and we've been very involved since. He'd quit being an artist, and he had run a frame shop for a long period of time, and then he became a screenwriter. And he writes Hollywood movies. To make a long story short, we've continued to communicate a lot about his script, and I'm a reader on his scripts now when they're going through things, and I read and I give him comments. But he's never quite been able to understand what I do. And I think part of it is, you know, a screenwriter starts with an outline and has an intention, knows what they're going to do, then tries to fit a whole sequence of events to get to where they're going to be. And they have basically, and so if there's a symbol or an image in there, it all connects to this kind of literal translation of something that they want to get to in the end, because there has to be a summation. It's he makes Hollywood movies, and so there has to be some degree of summation where everything fits into that, so it's really tangible. And for him, going into my shows was like, okay, what's going on? So he started to ask me about this show, and although I do a lot of research and intellectual work before these shows, and I started this body of work actually 6 years ago with a piece that I stacked up of my own books and books that I'd gotten from my parents when they both passed away. Which was, I did actually 3 of them, and they were called My Age in Books, and it was just like, I just stacked up the amount of books that I was, and of course, depending on the books you chose, they were very different objects. So I thought, this is interesting. Depending on the stories you tell, you have very different versions of yourself. So that was sort of the start of it. But he really hadn't seen these pieces, and he didn't know much about them. So a week ago, when I was finishing the show, having done all this other thinking about it, I thought, well, finally, maybe I can write him and tell him what the show is about. And I was finishing literally remaking the last 2 pieces. And so I wrote this. I'm not sure. I try to build a lot of layers into my work so that every time you experience them, you bring your own experiences, and you can have them mean whatever they want. So I don't want to fix the meaning too much. But I want to give you some kind of, I'm just going to give you this, that's all. This is what I wrote him to help him understand what I was doing. And by the way, his response was, "Oh, okay." So this is a little more literal than I would normally be. So I started when I was describing it. Every fact is a fiction simply because authorship entails point of view. Something will be included and others excluded. Every fiction on some level is a fact as it intends to create a livable moment that can be experienced as concrete. So this exhibition is actually a representation of my mind. It centers around the piece Hope and Desire, and I'd probably now include the Freud meets Judd Bookshelf over there. Those two sort of form a kind of central text or index for the show. Some elements are clear, rational, and legible. Some elements are foggy and associative. They feel at home, but are not literal. Others are clear, but ironic or duplicitous. They are all emotionally are in the same gravitational field. In other words, they relate to each other, and maybe I'll talk about that in a minute as the exhibition goes. Basically, my mind is a self-indulgent, idiosyncratic library with dusty stacks of books and windows of hope and desire. My feeling really is that everyone's mind is this on some level, so while I must have self-referential details to make my experience livable, because what else do I know deeply? It isn't about my mind specifically. I'm using my mind to represent. The larger question isn't this what culture was intended to do? In a world where the nuances of our individual interests, empowered by search engines which subdivide us to be exploited further by capitalization of information, everything can be sold. Isn't there a common cultural ground? That's sort of the central question, anyway. The library as a mind with all its inefficiencies seems to represent this better than the web, or more specifically the search engine as a mind. The library can veer, fail, get dusty, and be beautifully thorough engine of knowledge and experience because of its physicality and inefficiency. The internet in its efficiency is information before experience. So that's what I wrote him. And he was asking me, don't the books mean, what does this book mean? What does that book mean? And they do, on one other level of my experience, they're very carefully picked, and they're placed, and they're about what a book is a vessel for information, and what book is a representation, and how can a sequence of books be poetry, and all of this stuff that probably is more idiosyncratic, and how can the books inside contradict the books outside, and all this stuff which I can tell you about. But that is really not the central issue. It's really about that kind of, because your books would be your books and my books are going to be my books. It's not like you need to know anything about me. Couple of things, other little things. Now I'm off the letter. The show, I get really specific about the shows. I think an exhibition is actually, for me, not for anybody else, but for me an exhibition is like a collection or ensemble of poems or songs, if you were thinking, and there's a sequencing and there's a situation. So I talk a little bit about the exhibition. I know that most of the time, although tonight it's great that you can come in there and see the big blue wall, most of the time you're going to come in through here. I wanted you to be able to come in, see the blue over there, and have this kind of condensed space. I wanted these all close together so they were like stacks, that they're just things. I wanted you to get in the door before you saw the window, which is what that is a kind of way out of the space, obviously hung in an odd space. I wanted this piece to belong in here as if it's basically my height, as if there's a figure in this room. And then I wanted you to go past, and the drawings here, which were the only thing that weren't in my original plans, which were here already, and which seemed to echo this, so sort of make this a more condensed space in which you went from object to object. I wanted you to go into that room with its only three things, and I wanted you to be aware of yourself in a way. I wanted you to think, because you're really the person that's determining the meaning in this. So I wanted you to kind of go in and go, that is like, I am an object, that is an object, that is an object, that is an object. All of these things are in relationship to each other. How do I feel about that? What do I think about that? So I was trying to empower you in a more theatrical way in there than in here. So I wanted condensed and then an opening. just a couple of other things. The Hope and Desire, I did the Desire label for a show I did at the Palais de Tokyo, which is this museum in Paris. And the Desire label has skylights, and the Desire label was with the skylights. The sky in Paris when I did my site visit was absolutely blue. I tried to match that blue. I found out that blue was labeled French blue, and I thought, oh, this is meant to be. And you know, what's better in Paris than Desire? So I thought we'd do this, and there's a whole history to how I do the labels, but I'm not going to go into that right now unless you ask me. Later, like years later, I did the Hope. And these are like one-word poems. And I was trying very hard. I thought, okay, I keep thinking I've done my last shirt label. These are woven shirt labels, but clearly I hadn't quite. I decided to do Hope. I have kept colors and words together. And the only color that poetically made sense with the word Hope was the same color that made sense with the word Desire. But because they're woven differently, because of the size of the word, the text on the labels, Hope is a little bigger text. The Hope label is stiffer than the Desire label, okay? Hope holds its shape. That's like Hope in the left-hand corner, Hope in the bottom right-hand corner, Desire in the opposite two corners. Desire is a lot wigglier than Hope, okay? And those things matter. In my pieces, those are the kinds of things that matter, and they're important to me. It's not that I think that's important in all art. Some art can be really declarative, but for my work, I wanted to kind of, you know, I want you to like see it one time and think of it one way, and then bump into it later. I mean, and if it's in your house, or if you see it if you walk by it at somebody's here from the Modern who sees the piece in the entry to the Modern all the time. I want you to one day see it when you're tired and it looks one way to you. It looks really tired. I want to see it another day and it looks heroic. I wanted to have that kind of specificity, but so you are affected by it, but that you have some space in there so it can unveil itself in different ways. And so I always try to be really specific about what I'm doing, but I also try to leave a lot of space for you to be in there in my specific situations. So that's it. I'll take any questions, material, idea, anything. It's the resin is a polyurethane resin that's made specifically for casting. It's called crystal clear. It's like this. They've developed a technology where it's UV. It doesn't discolor. It doesn't do all the things that clear resins used to do. It's a very wonderful material. It's messy as all hell, and it's very toxic when you're pouring it. So. You have to, wear all sorts of stuff. But then it solidifies, and there are different mixtures that will do different things, and so that if you're going to float a book in it, you want to use some stuff that's going to. You can't cast very thick with stuff that is going to cure very quickly. If the thicker you want to cast, the more slowly it has to cure. So you cast a little with the thin stuff so that you can stick the book in the correct place so that it'll look accidental, but it really won't be. And then you pour with the thicker stuff, or you do another layer of thin until you get to the place, So it's that stuff. That's what it is. And in most cases, not in every case, but any of the incidents of the process, I kind of leave most of them around unless they get in the way of the art. R.E.
Yeah, do you have anything to say about Brancusi?
Well, obviously there's lots of Brancusi, and that's like, when you get the endless thing going, those are Sotheby's catalogs from the 1980s, which are now stacked and translucent. You read all the stuff on the information. So and then you do the Brancusi, you layer that value system over the Brancusi value system over the Bernini column from the Vatican. All my work's so super heavily referenced in that way that you don't have to get it to understand the work, but that all is in there, so that there's these layers of value systems in there, so that you could, and then you probably, hopefully, the person in my mind who's the ideal viewer least intuitively recognizes a certain kind of orderliness that is which is a patterned orderliness that then's perhaps contradicted by the market or ordinary market valuing of what is. The 80s was really, it's funny because Ari was a student of mine. I remember teaching somewhere in the 80s, art quit being a calling and became a career for some of my students. It's like suddenly they were like, I want to move to New York and be Julian Schnabel or Francesco Clementi, have a lot of money, buy a sports car and do a bunch of cocaine. And I thought, and before that it was like, even if you wanted to move to New York, it's like, somebody told me the other day, like David Solly said recently, he being an artist early on was like being a rabbi or a priest, and then later on it became like being a rock star.
Rachel Lightreed, Holocaust Memorial in Vietnam.
She obviously those pieces and the ones before that of Rachel Whiteread's, I know them very, very well. I love Rachel Whiteread's work. And they, the absence of books is much of what she's casting. And I'm dealing with the books as a vessel. It may seem like a variation of it, but yeah, I know those pieces. They're really great pieces. She's a really great artist. It's curious because, she was everywhere for a while. And then she sort of became absent in a strange way. You don't see as many of them as you should because she's a really great artist. And of course, those pieces of hers come from the Naumann pieces, like the space underneath the chair. And so everything evolves through generations of people. Rachel's essentially my generation. Probably a little younger than I am in age, but essentially my generation. You could probably throw some Gopers in there and some of the early Jim Hodges too.
I was just thinking in terms of the library and the book.
Yeah. No, and it's totally true. You've seen those bookshelf pieces where she casts the space and their plaster, and the color from the books bleeds into the plaster. And so what you've got is not the books, but you've got the absence of the books with the color from the books bleeding into these ghostly plasters. They are knockouts. If you ever get a chance to see one of those, they sometimes are like a bookshelf. There'll be a set of them going up. They're just beautiful pieces.
Is there an association with parallel material with ice?
I know it's chilly, okay, and I know that it's and I know that it holds light in the same way, and I don't mind the association with ice, but I'm not thinking that that's a dominant issue for it. I mean, I think that I like the fact that a lot of my other pieces involved for the last decade have involved words. This involves the absence of words. So I kind of like the fact that and that in a strange way with ice, because if you're doing something with ice, it's essentially a frozen vacancy. Anything else? I'll just say this, and then we can close, go drink and enjoy ourselves. Now, it's interesting because I was first in Sherman, Texas, teaching at Austin College, where Ari was my student. And so lots of my artistic roots are here. When I come back, it always seems like this is so many generations of my work has sort of happened here in Dallas in various venues. What I wanted to say was that, I'll do this. I'm already starting work on the next show that I'm doing for another place and so forth, and the work will be very different. But what's changed is that this will go away for a while now, probably. I'm not going to do many pieces like this for a while. It'll come back because it's different as I now used to seem more linear to me, but now it's like more like where I'm, if something comes up and I go, oh, that's a different way to look at it. It'll come back. This show was the first versions of this were what I told you about the books in my age, and then there was a show in Paris that I did for the gallery I worked there. That was the first version of these pieces. These are better actually than the ones that were in Paris because I know more about what I was doing. And then, but they'll have to probably go away for a while now. For me to understand, and they are, the next show's right now not involving this. You never know. I mean, maybe I'll take beer left all of a sudden. I give myself that space. Yeah.
Speak a bit about the drawings. Are they preparatory or just?
I never do preparatory drawings. So I did those stacks of books, and then I did the first translucent books, and then I do the drawings after the works. In all cases, the drawings are in reference to works, but they do things. I wasn't trained as a sculptor. I didn't even allow myself to call myself a sculptor until just a few years ago. I thought of myself as an artist in that I made objects because it slowed me down, and I would do things too quickly otherwise, so I had to have some resistance in order to allow time to think. I'm hyper, my ground was, early on was in performance and conceptual art, and then it went to drawing, and I'm hyper concerned about drawings. And I don't release drawings unless I think they're absolutely right. So I do drawings often after I've done a body of works or while I'm doing them, in which they will be in reference to the body of work. I don't let them out of my studio unless I feel like they are just, and I get to brag, I guess it's my night. I have a drawing up at the Pompidou right now in Paris. And that's like the kind of thing I go, it would be great if I had a sculpture up in the Pompidou, but to have a drawing in the Pompidou, I think, oh my God. And that's a very traditional artist thing, like, oh, drawing is something else. Well, thank you. But it is like one of those things, like doing a drawing, is like, for me, to have a drawing that's good enough to do that is like really wonderful. So I did these afterwards.
Do you do them from memory, or do you actually?
No, I did them from memory. And what I'll do is I have separate from my other studio, I have what was my original older studio is my garage. So I still have that. I have this other studio where I make the objects. And I can stumble out in the middle of the night and do something. I do usually like a dozen. I get a dozen sheets of paper, I clean out the space, I pin them up. I work on them for a while. I do that many because I learned very quickly that the only way to stop myself from fixing something, but when I don't know what when I get nervous because I've made something that seems new to me, and the first impulse is, oh, that looks different, I need to fix it, So to not fix it, I have to be able to have something else to do. So out of those 12 drawings, maybe I'll get 6, if that's a good set, and the other ones will hit the trash. But they could take as long as, they could be fairly quick to get the initial stuff down, and then they could take months of me just kind of stumbling in there and going, God, it needs a dot right there. Like this here, okay, my thumbprint right there, okay? I'm sure that it didn't have that initially, but this corner wasn't coming out enough. And then, of course, if I did that, then I needed that dot there. And, little crap like that. It's a mylar, which is translucent, so it had the qualities of the books. And in a way I thought, well, these books could be architecture. And that was like I just said to myself, well, these books are architecture, really. They're buildings. I'll do drawings that are buildings.
Joe, thank you.
Thank you.